On behalf of the Delaware County Democratic Committee, I'd like to welcome you to this debate between the 7 contenders in the Democratic primary race for the 19th New York Congressional District seat. The primary election is June 28th, and it's my understanding you have to register by June 20th in order to vote in the Democratic primary. Oh, June 1st, sorry, June 1st, I've been corrected. The winner of this primary will take on John Faso in the November general election to represent New York District 19 in the U.S. House of Representatives. If you are not registered to vote, we have volunteers at the DCDC table in the lobby who can assist you in registering. I want to thank the Delhi Central School District for allowing us to use this beautiful space in this quite magnificent building, the house that public education built, as it has built so many others. I want to point out, oh, thank you. The primary is June 26th. Any other help from the crowd is welcome. Again, I want to thank the Delhi Central School District. Exits are lit and obvious in back and here, and there are bathrooms on either side in the lobby, as well as drinking fountains. We are pleased to have the Delaware Academy debate team participating in this event. They are our timekeepers. They've developed 2 of the 7 questions we are going to ask the candidates today, and they will compile the questions from the audience. The debate team will be selling water and snacks in the lobby as a fundraiser for their upcoming trip to Washington, D.C. for a national debate competition. The moderator for today's event is Kay Stulegros, who will explain the debate structure, rules, and time allowed for each part of the debate. The last half hour of the event will be devoted to audience questions. We ask that your questions deal with issues appropriate to the office, and that personal questions and your opinions on issues be avoided. You may direct your questions to a specific candidate, but all candidates will have an opportunity to respond. This event is being videoed and will be available on the DCDC website and on its Facebook page. During the debate, we will have ushers circulating to pick up your questions, and they will then be compiled, and my moderator will ask them at the end as time allows. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Kay.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you all for coming. June 26th is probably the most important election Democrats will have for quite a while. For we will, I'm going to say this at the end, but I'd like to say right now, our time is short, so could you please hold your applause till the very end. We will be choosing the candidate who can become our representative in Washington for perhaps many seasons. So this is a very important election. Our special thanks go also to the candidates who are running for this seat and for participating today. Free and open elections are the heart of democracy, and issues are best discussed when we have competition. In addition to the candidates who will introduce themselves, we have on the stage Miles Dillian, raise your hand, and Jasper Kuda from the high school debate team, who will be helping us this morning. Also assisting are the timekeepers down in front. They will raise a yellow card when a candidate has 30 seconds remaining, and a red card when time is up. I caution the candidates, when the red sign comes up, finish that sentence. Not a compound sentence, not a run-on sentence. Finish that phrase. There are 4 parts to today's events, and the candidates have drawn lots to determine the order of speaking. Each candidate will have 1 minute to introduce himself or herself, and we will go in reverse order for that. Secondly, the candidates will answer 7 prepared questions. The first responder to each question will be given 2 minutes to answer the question. Then the remaining 6 candidates will have 1 minute each to respond by agreeing, disagreeing, or elaborating on the answer. The candidates will respond directly to the question and will not make personal remarks about other candidates. We are calling the third section the hat trick, and I will explain this when we get there. Then, following a short break, we will answer as many audience questions as possible. We are ready to begin, and Mr. Rhodes down at the end will give the first introduction. I would suggest, fellas and ladies, that we just sit. It will take less time. There is a button on there. You should be able to push the on side.
I'll stand for my intro if that's okay. Well, good afternoon, Delaware County. Thanks so much for having us. Thanks, Kay. Thanks, Jasper and Miles and everyone else. My name is Gareth Rhodes. I was born in Kingston, grew up in Ulster County, working on a farm. After became the first in my family to graduate from college, went out and got a job. Got a job up in Albany, working in the governor's office, where I worked for a number of years. Was out in Margaretville and Fleischmann's after Hurricane Irene. I remember being there when Smokey the Bear and out in the Freshtown parking lot was up to his neck in water. And I'm ready to make sure that we have someone in this race who is from this district, someone who has government experience, and someone who's running the type of campaign that I think it will take to beat John Faso. I am going to every single town in this congressional district. There's 163 of them, actually 19 right here in Delaware County. I'm going to every single town, doing little public events, to see what's on the minds of our neighbors, going to farms, going to firehouses, going to diners, doing something that's completely different than what we've done and seen in past races here. Because I think if you want to serve this community, you must also be able to listen to the voices of all our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Ryan.
Good afternoon, I'm Pat Ryan. I'm really pumped to see this many folks in the crowd. Thank you all for making time on a kind of cold, rainy day. I was born and raised in Kingston. My family's been in Ulster County for 5 generations. And I was fortunate growing up to realize pretty early that I was part of an amazing community. Teachers, coaches, church leaders, Boy Scout leaders. And my parents taught me that when you're part of a community, you have a responsibility to give back and to serve. So after I graduated Kingston High School, I went to West Point. I served 2 combat deployments in Iraq. And then after my military service, I started 2 successful small businesses to try to get better technology to our troops in harm's way. But I'm here today, I'm running for Congress because increasingly I look around this community, our community, and I feel like this is not the country that I risked my life for, that I saw fellow soldiers risk and give their lives for, and that's unacceptable to me. I'm running to stand up to Donald Trump and take back our country, and I'd be honored to have your support to do that. Thank you.
Good evening, Antonio Delgado. I live in Rhinebeck with my wife and our 2 little boys, twins, Maxwell and Coltrane. I grew up in Schenectady, working class kid. Parents worked for GE for many, many years and lived a story of upward mobility that I think for too many folks in the Hudson Valley and the Catskill has been forgotten and left behind. The economy has doubled in size over the last 40 some odd years. Wages have gone nowhere. 80% of folks right now are being asked to share 10% of the wealth. This level of inequality is simply not sustainable in a democracy, and it is imperative that we put folks in Congress who understand what it means to come from the margins, who understands what it means to get an education at a public school, who understands what it means to actually invest in working families and provide a future for folks all across this country, and particularly right here at home. Thank you.
Could I ask the candidates to please introduce yourself by name?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Erin Collier. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm from Cooperstown, and my family's been there for 8 generations. So literally my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather settled in that area after he fought in the Revolutionary War. Colliersville, over by Cooperstown, but my ancestors founded that, and I'm very, very proud of that. I grew up on a farm, 5th generation to be farming in this district, and my parents worked a second job because, as you all know, you really can't get by these days farming. Farming is dying here, and it's really hard to support a family that way. I've been working since I was 14 to put myself through school. I'm an alum of the Cornell Ag School, and today I'm an economist. And instead of going to work on Wall Street or some very lucrative job as an economist, instead I'm working on a project a USAID project that's the US government's one of their largest projects focusing on food security. So I work to make sure that people have enough food around the world, that starving people have enough food. And I'm tired of watching the Republicans only help the wealthy families, wealthy Americans in our country, and are destroying working class families. So I'm running to fight for working class families, and I would be honored to have your support. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Beals. I'm a high school history and civics teacher in Woodstock, where I live with my wife Sue Hare and my two sons Abraham and Joseph. And before that, I was a United States diplomat, and I had a government career spanning over the course of a decade, where I served our country pushing for peace in the Middle East, before becoming disillusioned about the direction our foreign policy was taking and deciding to come home and make a difference here on the ground. I'm 41 years old, and over the course of my life, I have seen our country lose the equality that it was founded on and lose the basis of its democracy to one force that I can identify, and that force is corporate power. I think it's grown too large. I think this election is a chance to stand up for it, and I'm proud to have been endorsed in this race by the national organization of Bernie Sanders staffers, the Justice Democrats, for taking a stand against that. I want to face down John Faso for us, and I don't just want to try to do it. I want to do it because I've done it before. I faced down generals, I faced down foreign heads of state, I faced down neoconservatives with ill intentions, and I pushed for peace and equality for our country's original dream. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Clegg. I'm from Woodstock with my wife. We've raised our family here since 1981. I've been involved in the communities around this district. I'm a trial lawyer with a civil rights background. I'm also an ordained deacon with the United Methodist Church. On the deacon side and the compassion side, I've worked to help start the homeless shelter, Habitat for Humanity, soup kitchens, and food pantries, and working in the community to uplift those who are vulnerable. On the trial attorney side, I've taken care of big corporations and held them accountable for predatory conduct. So I bring two things to the table. I want to fight against the corporate power that Congress seems to be beholden to, especially our congressman in Faso. I want to take them down and hold them accountable for all the things that they're doing, whether it be the environment, or taxes, or worst of all, our health care that they're trying to take away from us. So I want to fight those battles. I've fought them before, I've fought them before and I've won, and I want to fight them again against John Faso. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Brian Flynn. I'm your neighbor from Greene County. I'm the third generation of my family to choose Greene County as my home. I want to ask you a question. Do you guys want to stop Trump? Yeah? All right, I just want to make sure I was in the right place. If we want to stop Trump, we have to address the underlying issues that allowed Trump to happen. And that's what my campaign is about. I've got a plan to do just that. It's a plan for the American worker. It's about creating jobs. It's about increasing wages, but it's also about removing the barriers that have kept people down. And you have to choose the right candidate who can do that. And I am that candidate because I'm a lifelong progressive Democrat who's actually been fighting for Medicare for all for over a decade. And that's critical because John Faso voted to take away our health care. I'm the only candidate on this stage who's created hundreds of good-paying blue-collar American jobs. And unemployment in Delaware County is 50% above the national average. I'm also the only candidate on the stage who's been to Washington and got legislation passed. And that's going to be critical to have that experience. And finally, perhaps most importantly, I'm a union member. And union members used to vote for Democrats, and I'm going to bring them back. There are 150,000 union members in this district, and they're going to come back and vote for us because we're going to be a party of the American worker once again.
Thank you all. We now move to our questions. The first question is, do you support single-payer health insurance? If so, how would it be financed? If you don't support it, what is your alternative? Mr. Flynn will answer the first question. He has 2 minutes. The rest of them have 1 minute to respond to what he said or answer the question in any way they choose.
Thank you, Kay. I've been advocating for Medicare for all since 2004 for two important reasons. One, I believe health care is a right, not a privilege. And number two, it makes the most sense. By moving to Medicare for all, we will spend less on health care. We will have more people covered, it will create more jobs in our communities, and we will have better health outcomes. And this is critical because healthcare is the #1 employer in Delaware County and almost every other county in our districts. The Affordable Care Act created 500,000 jobs. The reason why the repeal and replace failed is because rural communities in Tennessee and Kentucky saw that they were going to lose jobs. Right now, today, in our country, we spend $3.3 trillion on healthcare. It's more than twice any other developed nation on a per capita basis. And we do that because of the corruption of the pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance companies. Medicare for all makes sense, and we can do it now, and we can also make it a bipartisan issue. Employers should not be involved in your healthcare. That's what keeps wages down, because we don't have fluidity in the workforce. We are forced that you're handcuffed to your employer. You're not allowed to go look for a new job. It actually forces small business owners to have the burden. So when I get out and tell people we're going to spend less on healthcare, the way it's going to be financed is in fact by spending up to $500 billion less on healthcare when you go to Medicare for all than we currently spend. We will easily self-finance it. But this is an important thing. We're hosting Medicare for All town halls throughout the district. And we have one coming up in Oneonta on Wednesday, I believe. And what's important about that is I'm listening to you. I want to incorporate your ideas. Already in some of these meetings, we've heard that we need to include dental. We need to make sure that we include vision. We have to actually make Medicare better, not just the way it is. So I want to enhance Medicare, do Medicare for all, and have a plan to make it happen. There are two bills in Congress, the H.R. 676 and Bernie Sanders' bill, which is Senate Bill 1804. We've looked at both of them. They both have great things. We need to find what's best of both of them and make it happen now. Thank you.
Mr. Clegg?
So Medicare for all is something I believe strongly in, single payer. And people are going to say, wait a second. Medicare for all, that's going to cost $32 trillion over the next decade. Excuse me, I'm going to say. You know what it's going to cost if we don't do it? $48 trillion. We can pay for Medicare for all and start spending down on the national debt. It makes so much sense. You know, the only problem is there's special interests in between. We have a pharmaceutical industry. We have the for-profit healthcare industry. We have to remove profit from our healthcare system. $450 billion of overhead, profit, and administrative waste in our system that should be going directly to care. If we do that, if we stand up to the special interests, and that takes a Congress that isn't beholden to special interests, if we do that, it'll be better for the 300 million people in our country. It'll be costing less for 95% of the people in our country. It will make our country transformed. Thank you.
Mr. Beal?
There is a resolution in the House of Representatives right now, House Resolution 676. There are 121 Democratic co-sponsors. I need your support to become the 122nd. That is a specific answer to that question. And listen very carefully, because I am telling you that I want to enact this on day one. It is not enough to advocate for Medicare for all. We have to actually act now. We've been coming up with excuses for decades in this country, and it's time to stop them, because we have a situation that shocks the conscience. I meet people in our district who are dying because of a lack of health care, a lack of treatment, or a fear of going forward to see their doctor because of the bill they'll face. You can count on me to act on this because I've built my campaign around it, holding healthcare forums around our district. I myself have faced down corporate interests in the past, and most importantly, I've got skin in the game. I've paid $1,200 in dental bills myself over just the past several weeks because of the poor, terrible care we get in our home. Thank you.
Ms. Collier?
I think healthcare is a human right. I think everybody should have healthcare. It doesn't matter your income, your age, if you have pre-existing conditions, your gender, everybody should have healthcare. And right now the Republicans keep trying to take healthcare away. Just with the repeal of the individual mandate, that alone in our district took away healthcare from almost 20,000 people. So I stand for Medicare for all because that system ensures that everybody will have healthcare. Not only does that ensure everybody has healthcare, but it's also the best way to reduce costs. When everybody is in the system, that is the best way to address the healthcare crisis that we have right now and reduce the costs and all the inefficiencies that are in the system. A public option does not allow for that. It does not ensure universal healthcare coverage. Public option is very similar to what we have now. We have private insurance, we have public options, and not everyone is insured unless you have a system like Medicare for all in place. So I feel very strongly about this. And it's also, aside from health, it's also costs. This is a huge cost for people continuing to pay for healthcare burdens. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado?
So there's no question that we must get the profit motive out of our healthcare system. I believe that healthcare is indeed a human right. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Andrea Mitchell, who was the young lady who was promised 3 times by John Faso that he would not take away her health care. This issue matters deeply to me. It is one that we must stand up together and fight, and no longer remain the only developed country in the world without universal health care. Now, what does universal health care mean? It could mean single payer, but a lot of countries that are also deemed developed and universal are not single payer. The fight ought to be to move in the direction of Medicare for all. The fight ought to be, how do we make sure anybody who wants to have affordable health care can get it? That means a number of things. It could include a transformative step by introducing a public competitor in the market, which we currently do not have at all. That would drive down premiums, it'll drive down deductibles, and it allows folks who want to keep their health care to do so and still join the fight for universal health care. We also must make sure that Medicare can negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. We do those 2 things, we transform our system.
Mr. Rhodes?
This is Pat Ryan.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. There's a lot of us. So I believe that every single American has to have quality, affordable health care. That is the overarching aim. That's universal coverage. And we also have to address the cost side, which I can't talk about in a minute. But bringing down costs so that we actually have a sustainable system so my kids and grandkids can have care that they can count on is important. What would I do from day 1, January 1st, 2019? Well, I think a single payer system is what we're headed towards. I'm not sure we could do it day 1. And what I'm focused on is what I could do in office in my first term. I think we could lower the Medicare age from 65 to 55, cover millions more people, and make that a healthier pool and bring down Medicare costs. 2, introduce a public option for those under 55, which would bring down prices as compared to the private market. And then 3, give negotiating power to the government to bring down prescription drug prices under Medicare Part D. That is the single biggest driver of cost in the system. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes?
I believe in Medicare for all, and I believe we need it now, and here's why. Here in Delaware County, we are the 8th largest county in New York State. We're bigger than the state of Rhode Island. There's not a single maternity ward in this entire county. And we're not the only county in NY-19 that is like that. I've spoken to mothers on this campaign trail who have to drive out to Binghamton to find a maternity ward. And it's not just maternal care. I spoke with a gentleman out in Hamden who had a little carpentry accident, and he went to the hospital in Walton, and they were Skyping someone in from Cooperstown to tell the nurse practitioner on staff what to do. There's a crisis in our rural communities with the delivery of health care, and we have to do something about it. And that's why Medicare for all is so important to me. I was up in Sydney not that long ago, and a gentleman came up to me and said, "We have a spaghetti dinner healthcare system." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I can go to a Rotary Club or a church every single night of the week and pay $20 for one of my neighbors, to support one of my neighbors' healthcare crises." This is happening in the wealthiest country in the world. It's wrong, and that's why we need Medicare for all. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question will be answered first by Mr. Clegg, and that is, what should a comprehensive U.S. energy policy look like? What impact would this policy have on Delaware County, and what opportunities would it present? Mr. Clegg?
A little dancer. We actually get along pretty well. Yeah. So, we have a moment in time right now, which we must seize. Seize the moment. We have to transfer our energy economy from one based on fossil fuels to one based on clean energy. All the opportunity that presents is something that we must grab onto. We must move as quickly as possible to a clean energy world. Now, what does that mean? We have a fossil fuel industry that we have subsidized for decades and decades and decades. And we can continue to incentivize it and give them an oil depletion allowance, even though they're some of the most wealthy corporations in the world. What we need to do to start our energy change is to stop incentivizing, stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, stop supporting them in ways that not only give them an extra profit, but harm us, because the fossil fuel industry right now, of course, and has for decades, polluted our world, our air, our water, and cost us additional monies to clean all of that up. So that's the first thing that we need to do. Now, once we do that, we incentivize solar, we incentivize hydro, we incentivize wind, and we make sure that all of those are new jobs that are being created. We talk about our economy right now. We have such a problem with living wages, and we could really change that with the fossil fuel industry leaving and the clean energy world coming, because all of the high-skilled jobs involved in transitioning are jobs that could create good salaries, living wages, allow our whole economy to be transformed in that direction in a very positive way. So let's work on that. Let's make sure that we are training. Infrastructure is something that we need along with this. The infrastructure that we sent away with a $1 trillion boondoggle to corporations in this last tax bill, we need to take some of that money, incentivize all the infrastructure we need, but especially incentivize this transition to a clean energy future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. If you walk up in front of the table, well, they solved the dance. Mr. Deal.
Climate breakdown is the #1 national security threat of our time, and I say that as somebody that spent a decade working in national security. I also say that as somebody that has traveled around here, spoken to officials on the Delaware Soil and Water Board, who have told me that they have been seeing flooding, unlike anything that we have seen before, right here in Delaware County, to the point that I wonder if you all heard that irritating Weather Channel deduction that Delaware County is one of the worst and most difficult places to live because of climate effects. This is the type of thing that's happening, and it's affecting us. So what do? We stop talking and we start acting. I led the field here in taking the off-fossil fuel pledge that calls for a moratorium on future projects in the fossil fuel industry and moving to sustainable energy by 2035. We can do this. We can pass a Green New Deal that will be a great boon for jobs and a great boon for our actual infrastructure. And we can stop lying to ourselves when we say that we banned fracking in New York State only to increase the imports of frack gas every year from outside the state. That's not action. That's deceiving ourselves on something too important to lie about. Thank you.
Ms. Collier?
John Faso used to be a pro-fracking lobbyist. So first and foremost, we need a representative who will stand up to fracking, not actually try to push for fracking. We had people come to our farm and ask us to frack on our land several times, and every single time we said absolutely not. We need to protect the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. The Clean Water Act actually allows for states to deny permits for pipelines to pass through. So as we know, that was actually the action that was the Millennium Pipeline got away with that. The Constitution Pipeline, it is essential for us to stick with protect the Clean Water Act to make sure that that pipeline does not happen and fight against the Republicans who are trying to reduce the regulations under that act. We also need to extend the tax credits. We have tax credits for allowing us to invest in clean energy, like the solar tax credit. That is going to expire right now in 2021. We need a representative who's going to push to make sure that we extend that so we're investing in clean energy and making it easier for people to do that. And lastly, we need to also stand up for environmental laws as well. Thanks.
Mr. Delgado.
I agree a lot with what Clegg said in terms of really making a transition away from fossil fuel to renewable energy, not just to protect and make sure we have clean air and clean water, but to create jobs. 17% right now is the rate at which solar is growing relative to the overall economy. It's also imperative that we do the work to address the flooding issues that we know are ongoing here in Delaware County. We can do that by restoring the floodplains, by repairing riparian buffers. There are things that we can do, and also I think make sure that we fortify under the Clean Water Rule that streams and waterways fall under the Clean Water Act. We do this and we make sure that our government actually puts people in Congress who care about protecting our environment instead of folks like John Faso who repealed the stream protection rule. I think that'll actually get us in the right direction.
Mr. Ryan?
Pat Ryan, I agree with my colleagues. I agree with this notion that the time is long past due to shift from this dirty, outmoded fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable-based economy. One specific thing that I want to add that I would fight for as a member of Congress. We need federal research and development investment here in the district, and I think SUNY Delhi is a perfect place to do it, where we would pump in federal R&D to make us a center of excellence in developing solar panels and solar technology. Creating that significant federal investment here would reinforce our public education system. It would create a trained, enabled, empowered workforce here in the district with good, clean energy jobs that are high paying, and it could become, I think, a part of our local economy where we could actually compete with others. As Antonio talked about, this part of the economy, the renewable energy sector, is growing leaps and bounds more quickly than other parts. So let's reinforce that and double down. I think we do it right here. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
The fight against fracking began right here in Delaware County. Anyone here from compressor-free Franklin by any chance? Yes. If we were clapping, we'd be giving you a round of applause right now. But this is where it began, and the fight is just beginning. And that's why I want to go to Washington and make sure we overturn the Halliburton Amendment. It's crazy that fracking is not regulated under the Clean Drinking Water Act. It's only appropriate that it's called the Halliburton Amendment because Halliburton paid for it. So that's what I want to do in Congress. And the clean energy future of the United States is happening right here in Delaware County. It's happening at SUNY Delhi, the integrated program we have there, which is training students how to install solar panels. It's not just solar, it's about battery storage as well. We're doing it right here. I want to make sure that Trump has proposed a 70% cut on the R&D side and federal funding for clean energy. We need a 70% increase in this to make sure that it's happening right here. It's both an economic issue, but it's certainly for the saving our planet for future generations. Thank you.
And Mr. Flynn.
This is an important question, and I'm the candidate on the stage who actually has experience as an environmental activist. I helped start an environmental activist group called Environmental Entrepreneurs, and that group looked for private sector solutions with public support, where we actually look to reduce emissions and create jobs at the same time. And I think right now that is the opportunity that Dave Clegg was talking about. That's the opportunity for all of us to actually look at policies that would reduce emissions and create jobs. What hasn't been spoken about yet is a revenue-neutral carbon tax. It's something that has bipartisan support and something that we should take the lead on, which would increase the cost of fossil fuels and therefore hasten our path to renewables. Right here in Delaware County, we have to look at the opportunities for regional solar. A lot of towns are struggling with installing it. We need to look at it more strategically. Scenic Hudson is taking the lead in this area. So we do it in a way that takes the most advantage of creating jobs, but also providing the greatest source of electricity while not necessarily providing any problems with other parts of the environment. So regional solar is something that's going to help us right here in Delaware County as well.
Thank you. The third question will be answered first by Mr. Beal, and that question is, Delaware County has a high percentage of self-employed and small businesses. What policies would you support to help these small businesses thrive and expand? Mr. Beal?
We have it within our power to take on corporate power and the power of big business that is strangling small business and the ability of working people to get by and lead to a real economic revival here in our district. But we have to be willing and ready to sever the ties of big money on our politics in order to do it. Let me be specific. I've met with the head here of Clark Company, who's one of the major employers in Delaware County, and I've met with many small business people in Delhi. And there's a common thread to a lot of those conversations about what we can do to make business work. Number one, they don't talk first about cutting regulations. Most small business people know that the best thing they could have for small business would be customers with more money in their wallets. And the simple fact is, we don't have much money in our wallets to spend anymore. And we don't have it because we are throwing away our paychecks to health companies and not getting anything in return, drug companies for inflated costs, and we have to crack down on that private industry now and end it with Medicare for all. That will change our economy and it will change the ability of people to get by. It will change the ability of small businesses to start up and actually not be strangled or prevented from running their business because of overwhelming health costs. I think that's number one, and I don't want to leave it out. The other thing is ensuring that we have a competitive environment that is fair to small business people. Small business starts are declining every year, while companies like Amazon.com turn many of our small businesses into showrooms for goods that people buy online. That has to end, and we have to go back to a practice we had in this country for decades of breaking up the big businesses that are strangling out competition and are not allowing people to get by. If we don't do that, if we don't actually dare to break the ties of big money in our politics in that way, we're not going to make progress. The last thing I think we need to do for small business is ensure that people can get jobs and that work can get done in infrastructure in our economy. Passing broadband and actually ensuring that people can get access here to the internet is going to change our economy. Putting people to work through a jobs guarantee will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Collier.
Small businesses are crucial to our economy in our district, and especially right here in Delaware County. We just saw Republicans give a $1.5 trillion tax cuts to the big corporations, while small businesses are helping to create jobs and employ people and drive the economy. So I want to see more focus given on small businesses like broadband. I don't have broadband at my house in Cooperstown. It is almost impossible to get work done. It's really hard, and it's a huge restriction for small businesses. It's also a huge restriction for people trying to access work, trying to be engaged with the global community. You know, the global economy these days, there's so much opportunity that you can access if you have access to broadband. So broadband. Secondly, Medicare for all, again, will cut the healthcare costs that are a really big burden for small businesses right now. I know a lot of people that want to expand and employ more people, and they just can't afford to pay the benefit costs. So providing Medicare for all will also be a way to help support small businesses.
Mr. Delgado.
So, during the financial crisis in 2008, we learned the phrase, too big to fail. But the other end of that is too small to succeed. And we've been seeing this now for decades. We bailed the banks out, we allowed them to continue as is while the rest of us deal with the damage. And businesses continue to have to struggle, small businesses that is, have to struggle under the weight of an unregulated industry, whether it's in the banking industry, whether it's in big pharma, whether it's telecommunications. So yes, I agree quite a bit with making sure we properly regulate these entities and stop treating our small businesses or our small banks the same way we treat the big businesses and the big banks. A classic example of this is access to capital and the limitations that we put on community banks as opposed to big banks to provide capital to small business owners. You loosen up some of those regulations on those community banks and you empower real growth economically from the ground up.
Mr. Ryan.
So first off, we need a member of Congress who actually knows what running a business is about. We've got John Faso, who's a career politician and a lobbyist his whole life. And this is an opportunity, I think, as a Democratic Party to win back a group of voters, small business owners who often have voted with the Republican Party. But with the tax bill that Aaron mentioned, that punishes small businesses, punishes businesses like my dad. He ran for 40 years in the district with 24 employees, constantly under pressure. Punishes businesses like the ones that I ran, small businesses. So as someone who's started and grown a business from a few employees to 150, this is something very important to me that I understand how to do. One very important policy idea here is rewarding small businesses that actually invest in their workers and in their employees, invest in their education, invest in their training. That empowers and enables small businesses, and we did this at my company. If you train and invest in education for your workers, you should get significant tax credits. That's something we could do now and would help every small business here in the district. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Certainly broadband is number one for me. I was out in Roxbury talking with the motel owners there and telling me about how much business they had lost because of the lack of high-speed internet. So that's certainly number one for me. Number two, cell phone service is very important for contractors, making sure we improve cell phone service, especially in a region where there's a lot of hills. It's also important for our local fire departments and also make sure that we're keeping our young people here. Third, I want to see a climate change resiliency fund. I've talked to bed and breakfast owners who, because we've had these 20-year storms every 5 years, these 5-year storms every 1 year, and people keep losing electricity, helping be able to purchase things like generators and flood mitigation costs. And then lastly, we need someone who can also help put our region on the map and promote the small businesses. I went out and ran in the 5K trout run in Deposit, a way to make sure that people know that Deposit's not just about trout fishing, but also about the small businesses there. I'll tell you right now, after all those pancake breakfasts and diner stops, running at a 5K was actually a little difficult for me. But that's the kind of commitment that I'm bringing to this and I bring to our small business community.
I've
I've been a small business owner for almost 30 years, and I can tell you some of the things that I've learned in that experience, what I've learned by talking to small business owners around here. Yes, Medicare for All will help them tremendously to take the burden off of small businesses. That's one of the reasons why I started supporting it over a decade ago. But also what I keep hearing, I met with the head of the Chamber of Commerce here in Delaware County, and I met also with SUNY Delhi, and I met with your superintendent here in the Delhi School District. And what they all say is the same problem, it's workforce development. And you have an amazing program here that I'd like to take to other areas where SUNY Delaware Academy is working with SUNY Delhi and doing basically a technical program. And it's working with industry. We need to fortify those programs so we can train workers for the jobs that exist today. That's something that's working here. We need to actually invest more in it and get it to the next level. The other thing we have to do is look at what I call my Small Business Accelerator program, which basically enables small businesses to defer taxes if they agree to invest in capital and their employees, just like we do with big businesses. We continue to punish small businesses. And the last thing is, they're not going to let me say it because they put up the red thing. So I'll get to it later.
Mr. Clay.
I'll tell you what it is.
All right.
So I would start with broadband. I know what a difference broadband has made here in Delhi. That you have some fiber optic wiring that gives people a chance to get on and do work on a national level right here from Delhi. And I've talked to the local business owners, and I did hear that one of the big problems are going back to Medicare for All, that they can't afford, as you start up a business, you can't afford to pay the premiums for healthcare. You have a deductible that you can't even use. So broadband is one of the big things. I want to talk about farming also, because I think that's one of the keys to this community, and going up to Otsego County also, that we need to target all the subsidies that we have in the U.S. government are going to big agribusiness. We're not taking care of the small farmer. Dairy farms need help. We need to support the milk price. We need to do all those things. We can then go to agritourism. We can do the multiplier effect for farms is really special, and all the businesses that creates and enhances, those things are something that we need to pay attention to from Congress. Thank you.
The fourth question will be answered first by Ms. Collier, and that question is, the United States has been involved in what seem to be endless wars in the Middle East. Billions of dollars have been spent and thousands of lives lost with no real end in sight. What are your views on our military engagements and the competing demands of military and civilian needs?
Thank you. I do want to say one quick thing, and the last question is that supporting small businesses is not just a supply side problem, it's also a demand side, and we need a comprehensive rural economic development strategy that will keep people here and reduce the out-migration to make sure that there's customers here and supporting small businesses. Now on to the current question at hand. Having a lot of experience, I've worked for a USAID project, as I mentioned. So I've worked on a US government project in Congo, I've worked in South Sudan, I've worked in Nigeria, I've worked in a lot of conflict areas on behalf of the US government, and seen firsthand how important diplomacy is over having defense. And our government right now, the Republicans continue to ramp up the defense budget and try to cut diplomacy programs, cutting State Department programs, cutting the program that I have worked on that again tries to make sure starving people around the world have food. Cutting diplomacy and ramping up defense will only undermine our role as a leader in this world. And I feel very strongly that we need to re-divert funds and make sure we're keeping diplomacy programs. Secondly, we should, instead of ramping up defense budget, we should be focusing those funds here in our country on so many important programs that we could be doing to help our own people. We should be putting those funds towards healthcare, Medicare for all, education. Our public education system is huge. I went to public school. I went to Cooperstown High School. My parents went to Cooperstown High School. And without that option, without being able to go to a public school, we would not have been able to afford to send me to a private school. So making sure that we're keeping funds in our public school instead of draining them into private schools and draining them to the defense budget that is unnecessarily high, that is where I think is much more important for us to spend our funds. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes, very appropriate question given the latest, I'd argue, reckless decision by Trump to unilaterally pull out of the Iran agreement. I would argue one of the more important diplomatic achievements that we've seen in some time. and it undermines our credibility. You know, we're at our best as a country when we project our values. That's when we're at our best, not when we project our might and our power. The reason why I think for so long we've been able to inhabit the leadership role, morally speaking, is because we've been on the front lines when it comes to advocating for democracy. And there's no doubt about it that right now we are going in the wrong direction. Whether it's the Iran agreement, whether it's the Paris agreement, we are continuing to isolate ourselves and alienate ourselves from the community at large. And it's a detriment to who we are, and it's not reflective of our values, and it needs to be changed quickly.
$7 trillion, thousands of lives. We're in the longest war in our country's history in Afghanistan, and it wasn't even discussed in the 2016 presidential debates, not once. This is absolutely absurd, and the balance is totally off. I have been on the receiving end of an order to go to war in Iraq twice, 27 months. I have seen firsthand how difficult and I think near impossible it is to try to impose our force in foreign countries, or our will in foreign countries using military force. And what I learned there is that the use of military force has to be the last resort, the absolute last resort. What we need right now, especially under a president and commander-in-chief like Donald Trump, is more Democrats who can stand up and say, I have seen this go horribly wrong. We need to end the endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and 11 other countries where we're conducting offensive military operations using an authorization for the use of military force from 2001. This is something that's very important to me that I will fight and go to the wall on. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Our Defense Department budget's about $680 billion, State Department budget about $40 billion. And what we're doing is Trump has proposed to increase the one, defense, and decrease the other, diplomacy. I think it has to be exactly the opposite. And our member of Congress, John Faso, happens to sit on the Budget Committee. He's been completely silent as these proposals have been made. We have to ask why. He took $10,000 from John Bolton, who now is leading the president's war cabinet, trying to lead us into yet another endless war. So Congress needs to authorize its role as overseeing any type of foreign engagement. As Pat mentioned, these AUMFs passed just shortly after 9/11, which are still governing our overseas operation. A second point, which is important to me, is cybersecurity. Did anyone watch that Orrin Hatch hearing where he had no idea how Facebook made its money? And we need people in Congress who get how this is done. My campaign was featured in a National Associated Press story for what we are doing in our own campaign for cybersecurity measures, because that's going to be very important this November, is that have campaign infrastructures which are resilient to these foreign attacks. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn.
When my brother was killed by terrorists in 1988 in the Lockerbie bombing, I got involved to advocate for stronger aviation security, but also to hold the terrorists responsible. And for over 2 decades, I helped advocate for the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. It's not the Iran-Libya Invasion Act, the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. We were able to achieve justice and security through diplomacy and sanctions, and that's the way we need to move now. Today, we have 600,000 defense contractors in the U.S. military. Often, they're working right alongside soldiers, being paid 4 or 5 times as much. We have to completely shift our focus here, put more money back into diplomacy, into the State Department, but really have an honest conversation about what we're doing. Nearly 20% of the members of Congress were either ex-military or tied to defense contractors. Well, we need to have people who are independent, who are in Congress, who can work for the people, not for the military-industrial complex. Thank you.
Mr. Clay.
I'm for the just war policy. Just war meaning you don't do preemptive wars. You don't attack places like Iraq when you claim that there's weapons of mass destruction. We have spent $10 trillion over the last decade on wars and have achieved nothing but to destabilize the Middle East and to make the world less safe. We have to go in a different direction. And obviously, we have to do what we can do for diplomacy. Diplomacy is the key. And standing up for something beyond militarism and being the bully of the world. Now, John Hall's a friend of mine. He was a congressman, and we had a discussion about this, and he says, you know what I think defense is? Defense is being strong as a country that has a clean environment, that has a solid economy, that educates its youth, that gives people a decent living wage and gives people a future and protects its elderly. That's what makes us strong, and that's where I want to put our money. Thank you.
And Mr. Beal.
If you want to take instant and important action to put a shift towards diplomacy and stand up to militarism and endless war in our country, well, we have an opportunity. Let's put a diplomat in Congress. I don't know of any other former Foreign Service officers or diplomats currently serving in Congress, and I would love to have the honor to be that voice for us, a voice of peace. And when I speak to it, it's because I've practiced it. I know what militarism looks like. It looks like me being sent to Iraq where we're spending $1 billion a month and discovering the budget didn't cover a cell phone on the Iraqi network or a TV set where I could watch Iraqi TV and not the Armed Forces network. I've stood up to generals before in the middle of our conflicts and said we needed to talk, and I successfully initiated the first high-level ceasefire talks of that war. Now I'm standing up to say we should not step away and violate this agreement we negotiated with Iran. We should demand right now a new authorization of military force resolution to ensure that this administration cannot declare war without the consent of Congress. And we have to slash the Pentagon budget and put the State Department back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. The fifth question will be answered first by Ms. Collier. No, Mr. Delgado, sorry. And that is, dairy farmers face painfully low milk prices. What could be done through the Farm Bill and other legislation to protect local dairy farmers from extreme fluctuation in pricing? What policies would you propose to support other small farms and agricultural-related businesses in Delaware County? Mr. Delgado?
So this is an issue that obviously affects you guys right here tremendously. And this goes back now, I think, milk prices have plummeted about 40% over the last decade or so, and the support for dairy farmers has really been ripped apart dating back to the 2014 Farm Bill, where they moved away from the robust price support program to the marginal price protection plan, which really just left dairy farmers to the whim of the market and provided no regional support. And this last Farm Bill in 2018 doesn't really do any better, in my opinion. I actually think the solution ought to be what Senator Gillibrand has proposed, which is to create a floor for dairy milk prices. And in the event prices go beneath that floor, the government can ensure the difference and make sure that our dairy farmers are not falling off a cliff. But we also have to keep in mind there are other elements to this too in the ag community. The fact that we actually have a congressman who voted for a farm bill that literally defunds programs like the Farmers Market Program or the Food Promotion Program or the Organic Cost Sharing Program. All the funds that we need to make sure that small and mid-tier farmers are able to do the work and actually have the support that they need to have a livelihood. He's literally defunding. I think the other important piece to this is infrastructure. There's $6 billion right now in New York City for local and organically grown food, a demand, a $6 billion demand that cannot be met right now in New York 19 because we don't have the infrastructure, whether it's regional distribution plants, processing plants, you name it, broadband. We don't have the capacity here to tap into that market. So I also believe we have to make sure that we support market access programs, support the rural agencies, economic development agencies, and bring them all to bear to enable our ag community all throughout the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. Now we got John Faso who sits on the ag committee. That's about all he does, is sit on the ag committee.
Mr. Ryan.
So I agree with Antonio. I think that the agricultural sector in our district, especially in Delaware County, Columbia County, Otsego County, this should be our competitive advantage. And our member of Congress should be there fighting, shoulder to shoulder with our small farmers rather than enabling and fighting for big farmers. John Faso, he took contributions of over $80,000 from an organization of sugar companies, none of which have anything to do with our economy here in New York 19 because he's on the ag committee. So one other specific thing that I hear a lot when I'm out talking to farmers, they're very worried about handing over their farm to the next generation of farmers here across our district. One of the programs that I would support and put more funding to is training programs for the next generation of farmers, encouraging them to be able to pursue this, to get the skills they need, to do it in a debt-free way, and then be able to have access to capital to either inherit a farm or start their own farm and not have to go deeply into debt to do so. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Right here in Delaware County, we have about 600,000 acres of farmland in 1960. Today, that's about 160,000 acres. So it's a problem here in Otsego County and Delaware County, the loss of farmland. And I grew up working on a farm. We didn't have dairy cows, but I know that $15 per hundredweight, you can't make money as a dairy farmer. It has to be at least $20 to even be able to break even. So what we have to do is what I would want to see is make sure that we set a baseline cost, like we have crop insurance for farmers who have vegetables and other crops as well. Make sure that they have the support when weather incidents happen. Make sure that our farmers are protected, our dairy farmers are protected from these fluctuations in costs. But also it's important to me that we reorient the way we approach our support for farmers from these massive corporate farms in the Midwest to family farms in our district, which can't grow to that size due to our geography. So it's important, I'll give you an example. Right now, Walmart is starting a facility in Indiana, 250,000 square feet. In Indiana, farmers here in this district are losing business because of that. So we have to reorient our policies to focus on small farms, particularly here in upstate New York.
Mr. Flynn.
One of the first things I would do as part of helping our small farmers is to actually finally do antitrust legislation against big pharma, big agriculture. Let's be clear about this. 70% of the input costs are controlled by 3 companies, which punishes small farmers in our communities. The other thing is, specifically with dairy, we have to change the regulations and provide support to enable dairy farmers to continue to look at value-added products, whether it's cheese or yogurt, so that they can actually expand their business, support them, support Senator Gillibrand's bill, but also add to it as well. We also have to look at, in Congress, we can change nutritional standards to get away from the corn-based things that we've been using, but actually encourage people to use local fruits and vegetables, which would benefit our farmers here in our district. We also have to invest in the middle infrastructure that would support our farmers, especially in areas here in western Delaware, but also up into Otsego. And this is critical. Comprehensive immigration reform. It's killing our farmers in this district. We have to address that. We should be owning that issue and leading on that issue, and we're not. Thank you.
Mr. Beal?
I was hiding behind Mr. Flynn. So, farming is one of the great resources in this community and throughout our district. We have the opportunity to use and enhance our farming to make us the quality of life better and to make the future for everybody here. As I mentioned earlier, the multiplier effect for farming is incredibly rich. And if we do that, and we do it in a way that brings the future, one that has organic farming, one that has dairy farming that's properly supported, it can enhance the lives of everybody around us. Now, milk prices back in 2014 were in the area of $24. Now it's down to like $16. People are not incorporating the cost of raising cows and the cost of producing the milk in terms of milk pricing. We have to change that. A floor of at least $20 would make sense. I am going to have a forum, actually, just want to jump in quickly, at Hardwood College on June 6th on sustainable farming. It's something that we want to address. The combination of Otsego and Delaware and move it forward in sustainable farming, it'll be a beautiful future. Thank you.
And now,
So many problems, and we keep coming back to one source. It is corporate power. And that is behind so much of the terrible decline we've seen in farming across the Hudson Valley and here in Delaware County, where somebody I know here once said to me, you know, it used to be weird if you didn't work in the dairy industry here. Now it's weird if you do. Things are upside down. I was spending time over at the Holly Hill Farm with Dave Holly. He is one of the farmers in our community here in Walton, who is going to be hanging up the farm. He's not going to be able to continue it. We haven't mentioned the specific big business that we have to take on, the specific interest. It's called the Dairy Farmers of America, a cooperative that was originally formed to empower small farmers, but has gone on to squeeze the life out of them by falling under the thumb of giant conglomerates and middlemen like Dean that have squeezed small farmers to the point that they wait to get their milk check and it comes with a suicide hotline note. We have to take action here right now, and we have to encourage our young farmers by giving them debt relief so that they can start up and pick up the shoes and what's left behind of people like Dave Holly. Thank you.
Ms. Collier.
As a farmer from Otsego County, I could talk about this all day. Farms are really struggling, and they have been for a long time, and we are right now on the brink of seeing them close all across our district. This problem is right now blowing up, and John Faso is on the Ag Committee, and he's doing nothing about it. I have friends, a really good friend who's a dairy farmer, has been a dairy farmer her whole life. She just sold all of her dairy cows last week, and it's heartbreaking. And once we lose our agricultural system, once we lose our small farms, we cannot go back. So I feel very strongly about this, and I will fight very, very, very hard to address this issue. There's a lot of things we can do. I am in support of Senator Gillibrand's bill. I love the idea of she's putting a price floor in place to make sure that farmers, the price they're getting is better, increasing the amount of funding they're getting under the milk program. That hasn't changed since the 1990s. The problem is that the costs are too high for farmers and they're not getting enough. They cannot keep up with the costs, that's why we're closing down. And we have to increase that. It also ties the price to inflation to make sure that the price keeps up with costs. And secondly, we have to address consolidation in the market. The DFA, as mentioned, is out of control and it is crowding people out. I will definitely address that.
Thank you, Ms. Collier.
Thank you.
The last two questions were written by the debate team. So Jasper will ask question 6 and Mr. Delgado will answer first. Mr. Ryan, sorry about that.
Yeah, I would just like to quickly say thank you to both the candidates and the community for coming to our school and supporting our club today. So, Mr. Ryan, this is for you. Should teachers be able to carry guns on school campuses? If so, what specific guidelines should be enacted? If not, what should be done to make schools a more safe and more effective learning environment? Thank you.
Thank you, and it's very appropriate that you're here, that you're leading on this issue, and thank you for the question. Frankly, this is with all due respect, it's a ludicrous and ridiculous idea. We are supposed to be protecting our students. I've talked to thousands of people as we've been knocking on doors who have described a similar feeling, dropping their kids off at school with the feeling in the pit of their stomach. Teachers walking into their classroom worried. My mom was a public school teacher her whole career. She just retired after 30 years. One of the hardest conversations I've had was her telling me about having to put her first grade students into closets in her classroom, shut the doors, turn out the lights, and to hear the fear in her voice and to hear her describe the fear in her students' voices. That is just plain wrong. And for me personally, having carried for 27 months in combat in assault rifle, and then to see that brought into our schools, to our concerts, to our churches, on our streets, it's wrong. And so the answer is simple, and I've been saying this from the beginning, and I'll continue to say it. I've said it in writing, I've said it at public town halls across the district. We need an assault weapons ban now. We've done it before in the country, and it worked. We need universal background checks. We need to ban bump stocks. We need to repeal the Dickey Amendment. We need to close the gun show loopholes. And there's a series of other policy fixes here. But what's really called for is moral courage and leadership. And I have been so inspired by young people across the district, across the country, who are showing us the way. And I get asked a lot, how do we get young people more engaged in our politics? Well, you guys are telling us. You're showing us loud and clear. And I want you to know that I will stand shoulder to shoulder with you so that we can all feel safe going into our schools and focus on what we should be doing there, which is learning. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Jasper and Miles. Thank you for that question. And Pat is absolutely right. If the young people are leading the charge on this, I always think if we just lower the voting age to about 16 years old, half of Congress would be out of the job tomorrow because of their failure to do anything about common sense gun safety reforms. I believe in an assault weapons ban, universal background checks, safe storage laws, allowing the CDC to study this as a public health crisis. These are all common sense measures, the majority of which John Faso has voted against since 1987. Voted against safe storage laws, the most common sense of gun safety measures. It is also important, I know, here in Delaware County, as we've all knocked on doors, we did so for Aiden O'Connor just a couple of weeks ago, If you're running as a Democrat in upstate New York, the Republicans always say the same thing. You're going to raise our taxes and take away our guns. We know those things aren't true. I came at this from someone who grew up working on a farm, where a gun was a tool, just like a tractor, just like a rake. I've gone to the rod and gun clubs. I've gone to the Sportsman's Association. I want to go into these places. I can take this message of common sense and safety reform to these areas and be able to win in tough rural areas with this pragmatic message that makes sense and that we need now in America.
Mr. Flynn.
First of all, I want to apologize to the students because we haven't done enough to lead on this issue, and we also haven't done enough to keep you safe. I know that the local Cumberland Farms has better security than our local high school does when it comes to technology. We have not invested in any of the technology that could help us protect our students, and we should be investing in that right away. But it really comes down to a question of access. People should not have access to the guns for the reasons we discussed. But as a gun owner and somebody from Greene County, we have to make gun owners a part of this solution. We have to stop pushing them away. We have to bring them into the solution. I spoke to my neighbor, John, who is an NRA member, a Republican, a big gun owner, and I said, John, help me out here. And he basically spoke to me and said we should have universal background checks, we should have close the gun show loopholes, who buys a gun at a gun show, nobody does that. He said, like Pat said, we should ban assault weapons. With the way we're going to fix this issue for you guys isn't by actually putting up walls between us and the gun owners, it's bringing them in. It's putting a wall up against the NRA. The NRA does not represent gun owners. 90% of gun owners are not in the NRA. We should stop being so afraid of them and take them on and let the kids know that we're finally going to do something to help them and we're not going to be beholden to special interests.
Mr. Clegg?
My wife was a special ed teacher and an elementary school teacher for decades, and the idea that teachers should be responsible for security by bringing guns is ludicrous and stupid, and we should recognize that. Now, we can talk about gun safety, and we should be able to talk about gun safety, and I want to point out something. All the things, and I agree with everything that's been said, all the measures we need to take to stop gun violence, and you know what? Not one of them is a violation of the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And that's something we need to make clear, because there are people out there who think that any kind of regulation, any kind of restriction is a violation. It is not. We can regulate under the Second Amendment. And when we go to the general public, we can tell them that, look, in this election, we can speak and challenge the fact that they haven't. The NRA has held Congress hostage and will not act on any kind of restriction of gun violence. We can stop that, and we can stop it without any violation of the Second Amendment. And we can speak loudly because the children have asked us to. Thank you.
Mr. Beal.
I'm a teacher, and I can speak to this from a feeling of guilt when I have to undertake active shooter drills in my school. But honestly, I don't want to speak as a leader here. I think the children are leading us. They walked out of my class, and they have demanded action, and I think we should follow them. You're the debate team, by the way, and it's my interest you to know. You ever been in the Robert J. Kaiser tournament over in Monticello in Sullivan County? Well, you don't do it there? Okay. Well, I was in that tournament back when I was in high school, and I won that tournament. Look, I'm running for Congress now, and you can too. And you can lead us, as you're doing, in demanding an actual change, sensible gun laws that I, as a gun owner, support, that people around our district would support. If we stood up to the real root cause, and guess what it is again, and I don't want to be a broken record, but it's corporate power. More than 80% of Americans support sensible gun laws, but we don't get action because you know who wants to sell more guns? Gun manufacturers. They have a hold on the NRA, they have a hold on our politics, and the NRA has a hold on us. We can break it by turning down these organizations and turning down their money. Thank you.
Ms. Collier.
I come from a gun-owning, hunting family. My dad hunts, my brothers hunt, our cousins come over to our house to hunt on our land. So I'm very, very familiar with what responsible, safe gun ownership looks like. And that is not the problem. The problem is the unsafe access to guns and the types of guns that are allowed to be in our society right now. So I absolutely stand for a ban on assault weapons, as well as a ban on bump stocks. We also need longer waiting periods and better background checks. You could go right now to a store in New York to buy a gun and walk out an hour later with a gun. That is not enough time to be able to make sure that that individual should be walking out with a gun. That's not enough time for us to be able to make sure that we're having safe access to guns. So I think I stand for longer waiting periods and better background checks, But also, in addition to everything that's been said, we also need to address our mental health crisis problem in this country and more funding to that, and making sure that we're giving support for individuals in that to make sure to also address the gun access issue. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think a solution to this issue is to make sure we don't elect anybody who takes money from the NRA. And we actually have a congressman right now who's taking more than $40,000. I do want to focus on a part of this question that is critical. It says, how do you create an effective learning environment? Obviously, arming teachers is not the answer. The answer is actually funding and prioritizing our public schools. That is how you create an effective learning environment, not spending $100 billion on corporate welfare compared to just $58 billion on the Department of Education, not wasting $125 billion annually, wasting in bureaucratic administrative costs from the DOJ. How much more of that is there compared to the $58 billion we spend in the Department of Education? Use those funds. Universal pre-K, invest in vocational schools, trade schools, apprenticeship programs. Do the work to rethink our curriculum and make sure that it reflects the needs of a growing, more competitive world. That is how you create a more effective learning environment.
Thank you. The last question will be answered first by Mr. Rhodes, and it will be asked by Charlie.
Hello. The question is, should tuition for post-secondary education be made free? If not, how do we control the growing problem of student debt?
Thanks, Miles, for your question. This really hits home for me. I remember when I got out of high school, Kingston High School, I didn't go right to college. Neither of my parents were college graduates. I went out and got a job drilling water wells. I volunteer firefighter. I remember my friend sat down with me and said, Gareth, you're a young guy, you should go to school at some point. I went to my local public library, and that's where I found out about Pell Grants, TAP aid, the SUNY system, CUNY, and got on that Trailways bus, went down to CUNY, became the first in my family to earn a 4-year degree, and I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here on stage today if it wasn't for Pell Grants. And that's why, to me, step one is we have to protect the affordability of higher education and make sure that students from low-income and middle-income backgrounds are able to access the system. Number two is student debt. We have a student debt crisis here in America. So I support efforts to refinance student loans and student loan relief. Don't tell me we don't have the money to pay for this. That tax scam bill that cost $1.5 trillion. That student debt crisis right now, $1.3 trillion. We have the money to pay for this. We aren't just giving it away to the special interests. The third, it's an important one to me as well, is in 10 of the 11 counties in this congressional district have higher education institutions. Right here in Delaware County, we have SUNY Delhi. I want to make sure that we have a public transportation system here in Delaware County. So we can make sure that students in Hancock, students in Hobart, students in Stanford, students in other parts of this county can come to SUNY Delhi and earn that degree. We have actually very low car ownership rates in this district are very low. So that's important to me as well. Fourth is, when we talk about farming, we're actually seeing a lot of younger farmers come into this area. I actually was talking with Irina and Matt with Treadlight Farms that's down in Bovina, and some of the younger farmers, some of the issues facing them. And student debt is a big issue for young farmers. It makes it harder to buy your land. As the farmers here will know, if you don't own your land, you're shooting yourself in the foot because that is your retirement. A lot of our farmers, younger farmers, are leasing land. So our farmers do a public service. There should be public service relief, just like there is for public service jobs, relief for young farmers to get them out of student debt. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn.
As I mentioned earlier, the way we're going to stop Trump and get this economy going is have a plan for the American worker and involve removing those barriers that have kept people down. And one of those barriers is access to affordable education. I have been for tuition-free public education from the beginning because it's one of the best ways to make it happen. Because let's be clear, 20 years ago, Pell Grants covered 89% of the cost at SUNY Delhi. Now it's less than half. And it's saddling our young people with debt and preventing them from participating in the economy. The second thing is, I believe we need to completely restructure the $1.4 trillion in debt that's out there right now. And here's why. It's almost like we need to give Economics 101 to the Republicans. We need to get the money out of the hands of capital and into the hands of workers. If we do a debt restructuring and give that money to kids and stop having them pay $650 a month in student loans, they'll spend the money in the communities. That's how we'll get the economy economy going. We need to unleash capital, get it into the hands of workers. If we do that, if we Democrats lead on that, we will be the party of the American worker once again, and we will be able to grow this economy. Thank you.
Mr. Clay.
I was a product of SUNY New Paltz and SUNY Buffalo, and I know that a state education that's affordable is something that can transform a life. Now, I'm all for public education being free tuition, and I think that would be a starting place where we can once again build the economy. If you look at anybody who looks at an economy, they say education is the starting place, and that's where I'd like to start. Getting into student debt, I have a personal story about that. I think a fraud was perpetrated against our students. The student debt load in this country is way over the top. Now, why is it? I had my son get a federally subsidized student loan, federally guaranteed student loan at 8% when I could go to my local bank and get it for 1.5% when interest rates were really low. Those rates were usurious for those students, and it should be changed. So we should have debt forgiveness, we should have readjustment, let people have a start, let people build for the future. When debts are so high they can't actually afford to buy a house, something's wrong with our government. Thank you.
Mr. Beal.
I'm a teacher of a class of seniors, and it's so remarkable to stare at seniors now and think back to the way I was when I was a high school senior, staring out at a future that I thought was limitless, and staring at my students who are looking at their own future with a feeling of trepidation about what kind of bills they're going to have to face from their student loan debt, what they're going to do about it, and whether or not the jobs they'll get when they graduate will ever even help them pay it off. I think we have to take dramatic action here. There's over $1 trillion in this student loan debt. I think we should forgive it. I don't know why we are giving enormous tax breaks such that Amazon.com paid no taxes in 2017 at all, but the United States government is actually profiting off of the student loan debt that we hold. I think it's wrong. I think it's giving students a mortgage over their heads and no house and no ability to start their lives, and I think we have to take action now. I think when we do it, and when we make public education tuition free and forgive student loan debt, it will be the investment in our future that we need, and it will make their lives a lot closer to the one that I thought I was going to face when I graduated.
Ms. Collier?
As I mentioned earlier, I put myself through school by waitressing since I was 14 years old and student loans. So I'm very familiar with what that burden feels like to have student loans. It dictates, for a lot of people, I know for a lot of students in our district, when you get out of school and you have those student loans, it can dictate which jobs you're going to be able to take, where's your first job going to be, where you're going to live, because those student loans are so high. And it's really a burden, and it's an unfair burden for young people, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. So I am absolutely for free public education, tuition. I'm also for reducing the interest rate on student loans right now. They are astronomical, and it just increases the amount that you're paying back on student loans to begin with. And secondly, I'm also for making sure that we're reducing education costs for low-income families. Even, to begin with, a universal pre-K should be absolutely added to our public education system to help low-income families be able to lower their education costs and have everyone access a good education.
Mr. Delgado.
Yes, I agree with debt-free tuition. I also believe that we should pursue loan forgiveness programs. We can encourage our young people to get involved in various endeavors, whether it's the Peace Corps, Teach for America, or whether it's getting involved in certain areas and technological spaces that we see a real need, and forgive them by virtue of doing that, their debt. But this goes back to priorities. When I was growing up in a working class household, my parents came home every day and made sure that they looked out my homework, because for them, that was the gateway to opportunity. They talked about it being the great equalizer, that no matter where you start, if you get a good education, you can make your way in this country. And the harsh reality is that right now in this country, that is no longer the narrative. It is no longer the case. We have stopped prioritizing education. We have tried to make it all about privatization and vouchers and taking it totally out of the hands of what it means to actually promote the general welfare. And the only way you can do that is if you fund public schools and build from the ground up.
Mr. Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. I've talked to an alarming number of high school students who have said to me, I don't think college is worth it. I'm going to spend tens of thousands of dollars, be in debt for 10, 15, 20 years, and I don't even know that I'm going to be able to get a good quality job after all that time and work and blood, sweat, and tears. That is not how this country should work, and I agree with a lot of the proposals of my colleagues. Another plan that I've put forth in writing is a plan for national public service, optional, but anyone who's willing to serve the country in the military, in the Peace Corps, teaching a nurse or a doctor in a rural, underserved area, will cover the cost of your higher education debt-free. That is something that would be transformative in terms of addressing college debt. I also think it would be transformative in terms of giving our young people opportunities to come together, work in groups, of very diverse groups, and actually accomplish a mission and work towards something bigger and greater than themselves, which is core to how we fix the divide in our country right now. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's time to give our candidates a round of applause. They're calling the hat trick because they threw their names in order out of, not a hat, actually out of a basket. It's a basket trick. So each candidate will have the opportunity to ask another candidate any question that's pertaining to this election. The candidate will then, the responder will have 1 minute to respond to that question. And so Mr. Flynn will have the opportunity to ask Mr. Rhodes a question. And will they both stand so that everybody can see who's who?
Hello, Gareth.
That's an easy question.
So we've all agreed that after the election, whomever wins, we're going to help out. And let's assume for a moment that I'm lucky enough to win. If you're going to go out, and you've obviously heard me speak once or twice, you know my platform. When you go out there on hopefully June 27th, or maybe late the night of June 26th, and you're campaigning for me, and we can do it together in Winnebago, what would you say about me to convince someone to vote for me?
Very good. Let me start by saying, I think for many of us, we've all said that no matter who wins this primary, we all will get out behind them no matter what, because this election, the stakes are far too high to not rally around. And what I've said is, no matter, I hope to be the winner. If I'm not, I'll make sure that any of these candidates gets to have my Winnebago, so they can go to every single town in this district and not have to go home every night. And so, Brian, I look forward to, if in that very unlikely scenario, miracles can happen. I look forward to going out there and we can keep on spreading the good word, that you've been talking about today at the forum. And I have to say that what I admire about Brian as I've traveled around this district, I often hear a lot of people who've met Brian out on the trail, and I think he's if you follow Brian on Twitter or on Facebook, he's a tenacious campaigner, and that's something I really admire about Brian and the way he's running his campaign. And I think I've knocked on some doors sometimes, and people have come out and said, "We've met Brian Flynn already," and I think I give him credit for that.
Thank you. It's good to know you're both so well prepared. Mr. Clay, would you like to ask Mr. Flynn a question? Well, not would you like to, please ask him.
Brian Flynn is getting way too much attention right now. Way too much attention. But we actually do like each other, and we had some fun together at times. And so what I'm going to ask Brian is, who do you think amongst all these candidates is the best basketball player, other than the 6'4" or 5" guy sitting three chairs down from me? So we're leaving Antonio out of the mix. I just want to hear the answers to this question and back it up with facts, please.
I'm going to answer that question because this is a slightly embarrassing story. So Dave asked us to play basketball, and Jeff and I played with him once recently, and Dave is by far the best basketball player on the stage. Dave is a little bit older than me, and he kicked my butt so badly in that first game, I still haven't recovered. And then he's also a very generous person, and one of the reasons why I think he is a great candidate is he's a very generous person because he then let me win the next game. And I'm not kidding, he actually said, oh, go ahead and win. But actually, since you did ask the question, I actually do want to take this opportunity to say why Dave Clegg is such a great person. His track record in fighting for social justice and racial justice and for causes in our community is unmatched, honestly, by anybody else on this stage. Dave is a warrior for our community and for doing things that's right for especially those who have the least. So I think of the people on this stage, I would have to say that Dave Clegg is the one who has that track record, and I admire him greatly for that. And I would be honored for him to serve as my basketball coach.
And Mr. Beal, you have the opportunity to question that tall guy down the road.
I'll ask a real one. We all want the best for our district. I believe that we have a crisis in healthcare, and I believe that we have to enact Medicare for all on day one. Antonio, I know you want the best for our district too. You are a bankruptcy attorney for the largest lobbying law firm in the United States that does a lot of business with the health industry, and you don't support enacting Medicare for all on day one, but you've said you want us to move towards it. I need it, my friends need it. I'd like to know when we'll get there, and if you can give us a date that we would arrive at that policy for our country, for our people.
Yeah, I would say this. I think that one way we won't get there, as Democrats, is to draw inferences or to lay accusations about where one has worked and try to draw from that a malicious intent. I think we're all here for the right reasons. I tell you, I am. I'm here to serve, and I'm here to fight like hell for all of you. And I think we can have reasonable disagreement on how to achieve the outcome that we all most desire. And as I've said repeatedly, the outcome is to push time and time and time again with great effort towards a system of Medicare for all. And how we get there practically, responsibly, matters. And if we want to fight this fight, and fight it with the dignity and the class and the values that define who we are as progressives, it is imperative we do that without pulling facts that aren't actually facts out of thin air and really having a discussion about the issues and what makes sense. Thank you.
And Ms. Collier, would you like to ask Mr. Wright a question?
All right. I have a real one too. So, you know, an important part of being represented in Congress is making sure that we get things done and working with others, and especially, you know, in a swing district that's going to be reaching across the aisle a lot of the time. So are there any members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, you think you would be able to collaborate with, and if so, who and why?
That's a good question. So I think this is at the heart of what a big problem in our politics is right now. And I'm actually really proud to have been endorsed by and taken a pledge from a group called With Honor. And what this group is about is exactly what your question was getting at, Aaron. Part of this pledge, and to me this seemed like a pretty low bar, but apparently it's not in Washington right now. One of the items is once a quarter to meet with a member of the other party. Once a year to co-sponsor a piece of legislation with a member of the other party. And third, to bring integrity and positivity back to campaigning and not conduct negative campaigns. And talking to friends who are members of Congress right now, you would think that would be a low bar, but they're told by their political advisors, don't be seen talking to members of the other party. And you know who pays the price when that is the culture in Washington? Every single one of us in this room. Because we're getting torn apart and put in our corners when what we need to do is figure out, philosophical disagreements aside, how do we come together and actually get health care for everybody, get infrastructure spending going, get broadband here for... Thank you.
And Mr. Delgado, it's your turn to ask that superior basketball player.
Yeah, and I want to, you know, I think, Clegg, you left out something. You know, when you say the 6'4" guy, you know, the fact of the matter is, he told you I played Division I basketball. You know, it's a pretty important fact. At Colgate, you know. So, Mr. Clegg, you are an ordained deacon, if I'm not mistaken. And I did want, and I respect, obviously, your commitment to faith, and I, as a man of faith, you know, I wanted to hear from you how you think, assuming I win, you know, what can I do as a congressman, or even taking me out of the equation, what can we do politically to have more meaningful conversations with people of faith, to bring morality back into our politics without creating the division that I think is unwarranted?
All right, he is a Division I basketball player, and there is a reason we didn't invite him to. We actually did, but yeah, you know, one of the things, and I want to talk about this, obviously we want to work across the aisle, but one of the things that's really bothered me is the fact that Republicans have held this mantle of the party of values. Because I look at the Democrats as being the party of values. The party that cares about both the born and the unborn, and the women and the vulnerable, and the elderly and the people who need support in Medicare for all. All the things that we are talking about are things that people of faith should be drawn to. So when we go across the aisle and we talk about things, I want to reach out as an ordained deacon and say, if you look at the New Testament, what they say is, I want to see what you've done to help the widow and the prisoner and the sick and the oppressed. Those are the people that we have to pay attention to. And I'd like to speak loudly about that to everyone in our district. Thank you.
And Mr. Ryan, how about asking Mr. Beals a quick question?
So Jeff and I become good friends in the campaign because we both spent probably more time than we would like in the country of Iraq, albeit from sort of different angles. So I'm tempted to ask you about foreign policy, but I want to actually ask you a question about public education. So my mom is a public school teacher, has been her whole life. I think public education is the single most important investment we make in this country. And you've talked about that, but you're actually a teacher at a private school. And I'm curious how you sort of think about that and sort of, particularly in our rural areas like up here, how do you kind of reconcile that?
Good question. You know, you're all members of the debate team, and you have conflict, and I think it's good. And I teach my students to do that. And I think some of you know the old story of a woman that said to Harry Truman, "Give him hell, Harry." And he responded, "I'm not going to give him hell. I'm just going to tell the truth, and they're going to think it's hell." And if you think any of this is tense, wait till I talk to John Faso in the general election. Now, as to that, I'm a graduate of public schools. My mom's a public school teacher. My brother is a public school teacher. And I believe in the profession of teaching. And I myself am a teacher at Woodstock Day School, which is a pre-K through 12 program, which is a job that I'm very proud to have. I think teaching is a noble profession anywhere you can find it. Unfortunately, a lot of people know that public schools have been declining in our district. My co-chair in my department is actually a teacher ex-ess from Monteora, who taught in public school system, doesn't have a job there. I myself don't have all the certifications right now to teach at a public school, but I'd love to do it, and I believe in teaching, and I'm really proud to practice it. Thank you.
And the last question, Mr. Rhodes, for the lady on this pad.
Hello, my question's for Aaron, right? Yes. Well, so I grew up working on a farm where mostly had in vegetable and apple part of the state, and I know Aaron grew up in the more dairy part, so I've been enjoying, since Aaron and the race, hearing a lot of stories from dairy country, but I'm not going to ask you about farming. I want to answer you a question that was asked of me when I walked in, and it was like I love this question, so I thought, hey, I'll ask someone else. What is your favorite town in Delaware County, and why?
Answer to this? I don't know. That's a tough one. I will. Oh boy, I'm not gonna be able to please everybody on this one. I'm gonna go with Delhi because I have a good friend that's from here. So through her, I've spent some time here, and her family is lovely. So I would go with Delhi. But I love all of Delaware County. I love all the towns and every single town in Delaware County.
Thank you. I think we have seen we'll go back to the first order. And this question was sort of alluded to in the discussion we had a few minutes ago. Mr. Flynn will answer first. What in your background has prepared you to work collaboratively with Republicans to reach good conclusions? How about 1 minute each so we can get over all these questions? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Nope. I got it. Thank you, Kay. As I mentioned earlier, I approach these things as not necessarily Democrat versus Republican. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm a genetic Democrat. The grandson of 4 Irish immigrants, and we didn't have a choice growing up. But it also means that I understand I'm all about getting things done. So when I was working in Washington to get the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act passed, I had to work bipartisanly. I had to work across the aisle. I had to actually fight against the oil industry who kept coming in and trying to win people over. So I have that experience, number one. Number two, I've also worked in business, where you have to actually take care of your employees, take care of your customers, take care of your suppliers in order to get things done. The third thing is, I actually believe the issues that I'm talking about are bipartisan issues. I'm talking about creating jobs. I'm talking about removing the barriers that keep people down. I'm talking about health care for everyone. I'm talking about emphasizing public education. These aren't partisan issues. These are issues that we can agree on, and we can go to Washington and make things happen. And most importantly, on the environment, there is a great opportunity with a revenue-neutral carbon tax where Republicans are already talking about it, and we can lead on that issue.
Mr. Clay.
I had the privilege of being the chairperson for the Human Rights Department in Ulster County. And the human rights issue was very divisive in Ulster County. And we had a Republican legislature that really didn't want to adopt a new law that we desperately needed. And so we brought together a task force, and I was privileged to be on that task force. And we worked with Republican legislators and Democratic legislators and people in the community who had an interest in the issue. And I was so heartened that we got to a place where each side could hear the other, each side could recognize the seriousness of the concerns, and we got to a place where we actually have adopted a new comprehensive human rights law that the Republicans were absolutely against when we started, but by the time we completed the dialogue, we were all on the same page and felt very positive about it. So I've had that experience of working across the aisle on an issue that was very divisive and one that was successful. So thank you.
Working across the aisle is not just something that I talk about, it's something I've done. In my career, I served under Republican and Democratic administrations. I served under the Clinton administration, I served under the Bush administration. And I fought with both sides, frankly. I fought with Democrats believing that we needed to do more to achieve peace between Israel and Palestine. And I fought with neoconservatives and Republicans who I believed in Iraq were not doing what we needed to do to bring peace to that country and extract ourselves from a terrible conflict. And it's been one of the interesting things for me of this campaign is people scour my background, that they've reacted with surprise and shock every time they find that I know Republicans and that some of them support me. I do. I have friends of mine, and one was a Navy SEAL who I worked with to get a hostage release in Iraq, who's a big open supporter of my campaign. He's an arch conservative. I have another friend of mine who I turned down the oil industry and refused to take a job with ExxonMobil. You know what he did? He took the job. And I didn't agree with him, but he's still somebody that's a friend of mine who supports me. We can build these bridges and we can find ways to make solutions to the other side, and I've done it in my career. Thank you.
My family is actually politically split, so half my family are Republicans. So that means I've spent my entire life debating with Republicans across the dinner table, which actually is probably what inspired me to be a lifelong strong-spirited Democrat. But, you know, that's what it's going to take. It takes somebody that is familiar with and knows how to have those conversations and can talk to Republicans and know the other side and see the other side in a swing district like ours. I'm also the only candidate on the stage that's from a swing county in our district, which is really important because I can take votes away from John Faso in the swing part of the district, which is what we absolutely need to do to flip this seat. And lastly, as an economist, I feel very, very strongly about evidence-based conclusions and evidence-based policy, and it is something that is greatly really lacking from our leadership right now, and it is something that I will get back to. And I think if we can just focus on what works and what policies have positive outcomes for everybody, then that's a great starting point for talking with people on the other side. Thank you.
I would say that my diversity of experiences growing up has really put me in a position to do this effectively, and by that I mean work across the aisle and think about solutions from other folks' perspectives. I've done this my whole life. I mean, I started off, a little kid in Schenectady, working class roots, cutting coupons with my mother on Saturday mornings, to playing basketball at Colgate and studying philosophy and political theory, then off to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, then coming back to get my law degree at Harvard, then going out to LA and starting my own independent music company in the hip hop community, then coming back to New York and working in the corporate space as a litigator. I've accumulated a diverse array of experiences, and throughout my life I've had to try to figure out how to be successful along the way and build bridges and solve complicated problems. And now I want to bring all those skills right here home and do the right thing by you and advocate for you. Not even for the party per se, but for you. And I think we can do that.
One of the hardest days of my life was I was leading a patrol of soldiers in Mosul. This is 2008. And our patrol was hit by a roadside bomb. And one of my soldiers was wounded pretty badly. And, we did what we were trained to do, which is rush and provide medical aid. And you know what I was not thinking about at that moment? That soldier's gender, that soldier's race, that soldier's religion, that soldier's political party. This is what's wrong in our country right now. We are thinking of all these other divisive identities rather than realizing that we're all humans, we're all Americans, we're all part of a community and a society, and we have to take care of each other. We need members of Congress who are going to bring that mindset to the job, not the mindset of divisiveness and partisanship. And I've seen it, and I've seen how groups, totally diverse groups, come together to work for a greater good, and I know that that is what our country is about, and I know that we can get back there again. Thank you.
So I grew up in a pretty conservative family, faith-based family and community here in upstate New York. But I also am the only candidate up here who's served in government here in New York State, and I went out and I fought as hard as I possibly could for marriage equality. I fought as hard as I possibly could to try to put Roe v. Wade into state law, which is still a problem today that has not happened. So I know that sometimes led to some difficult conversation at the Thanksgiving dinner table. But that's where I come from, and I think it will give me the ability to help reach across the aisle, but also stand up strong for the progressive and democratic ideals that I hold dear. But I'm also running a very different type of campaign. I'm going to every town in this district. When I announced that I was going to do that, a political consultant called me and said, "Gareth, why would you go to Hampton? 1,300 people, not a lot of Democrats. Why would you go there?" Well, that's why I'm going there. I've been there now 4 times. Planning to go back there for a 5th time. Spending time in these areas, because I believe our party, we have to start showing up in rural communities. We have to start showing up in areas where there's not just Democrats, not just to win, but to change our politics.
Thank you. This next question will go, Mr. Clegg will answer first. How do you feel about equal rights for women, right to an abortion, funding Planned Parenthood?
I get asked this question on occasion because people know that I have a religious background as an ordained deacon, and I want to be clear that I am fully for a woman's right to choose and fully supportive of women, not just on their reproductive rights, but all across the board, on economic justice, on the right to good paying jobs, on the right to be paid equally, something that John Faso apparently hasn't caught up with. I was over at Planned Parenthood the other day, and we had this discussion, and I believe that Planned Parenthood is the institution in our country that has done more to prevent abortions than any other institutions. And it's time, right? It's time for the other side to see that and realize that we protect women, that we provide good health care, that we provide equal justice for all women. And when we do that, our world will be a better place, and our country will be a better place.
Mr. Beal?
I support a woman's right to control her own body. I think it's a fundamental right. I think it's something that our party has to stand behind. And I think It's something that John Faso represents a threat to and cannot be allowed to beat around the bush on that issue and straddle it and take both sides. There is only one side to it. It is the right of a woman. And this speaks to a deeper problem of inequality in our society. Right now, women are earning about 80 cents on the dollar for every dollar that a man earns. Women of color are earning 60 cents on the dollar. And on the largest scale, when you look at corporate America, there are among Fortune 500 companies more executives with the name John than there are women at all leading any Fortune 500 company. So I say we tackle this head on and we tackle it at that source. We pass wage equity bills. We actually take stances to always defend a women's right to choose, legislate it as well so the Supreme Court can't undo it. And we recognize that this defining problem of income inequality is hitting everybody across our economy and has to be ended. Thank you.
As a woman, the Republicans' attacks on women's health care is very personal to me and is something that I will fight to stand up against with everything I have. I am endorsed by Emily's List, which, as many of you know, is the nation's leading organization supporting pro-choice Democratic women. Myself and 2 congresswomen from New York are the only Emily's endorsed congressional candidates in New York, and I'm really proud of that. That speaks to how much I will stand up for and stand up and speak for women and protect our right to choose. John Faso has voted to defund Planned Parenthood. He has voted for restricting federal funds towards health care that even includes abortions. I will fight very, very hard to stand up for Planned Parenthood and make sure that we keep funding for that. That is an essential healthcare service, especially for low-income women, and it is absolutely essential, and I will fight for it with everything I have. Thank you.
Yeah, and he didn't just defund it, he did so after promising and telling the community that he wouldn't. Right? He said he wouldn't defund Planned Parenthood, and he made a vote that did just that and would have done just that. I am pro-choice. I am here to defend women's reproductive rights. No question about it. We have to. We get folks in Congress right now who are trying to vote for 20-week bans. It's getting out of hand here. We've got to get folks in Congress who understand that when we're talking about women's reproductive rights, we're talking about an economic issue as well. You know, planning school, planning a family, planning work life. A lot of that revolves around a woman's health choices and how she has to think about bearing a child. And as men, I feel like we've gotten, I shouldn't say all men, but a lot of us here, and particularly the ones in Congress right now, have failed to understand how those 2 issues interlink. And it is imperative that we do the work both in terms of the income inequality gap, but also from the standpoint of this notion that for too long, men, I think, have been using women's body as a weapon against them, and it's got to stop.
I agree with my colleagues. I'm unequivocally pro-choice. We have to stand and continue to defend the onslaught of attacks on Planned Parenthood and other similar organizations. John Faso himself voted for a bill, as Antonio alluded to, that would have made it illegal for abortions post 20 weeks. It luckily is probably not going to make it through the Senate, but it actually passed the House. That is where our country is at right now. So we need to send a member of Congress, I think all of us are on the same page, who will continue to fight for that. The other thing that I want to talk about on this issue is economic freedom and economic security for women. Fair pay and equal pay is a similar pillar in this fight that we have to continue to work on to get to equality. At the company that I co-founded, which I led with 2 women, we were very focused on ensuring that we did this with fair pay, and I'm proud of the fact that my company not only had paid maternity leave, but paid paternity leave to finally provide some equality, which is a systemic problem in how we're paying for child care right now. Thank you.
I, like my colleagues, I am pro-choice and support fully funding our Planned Parenthood facilities here in our community. And I want to just talk a little bit about what I've heard here in Delaware County from particularly women when I travel in various communities. I mentioned the maternity ward problem we have here in Delaware County. We have 4 health centers, but none have a maternity ward. I would like to see one return to the Walton Hospital to make sure that there is that facility here in our community. I've also heard a few times now, postpartum depression here in New York State wasn't actually covered by health insurance plans until just very recently. It's an issue I hear across this district. I want to make sure there's more federal support to help women with postpartum depression. Make sure we're addressing that. The cost of child care. We have, it costs about $14,000 a year here in New York State for child care. Federal tax credit, about $3,000. We have to make sure that federal tax credit is increased. We're the only industrialized nation that doesn't have paid family leave, so I want to make sure that we can pass a real paid family leave plan. We've started here in New York State. It has to be done now on the federal level.
I'm the only candidate on this stage who's been recommended by Vote Pro-Choice based on my strong record on these issues. So I'm unequivocally pro-choice, and I believe this is about reproductive justice, not just reproductive rights. Everything from political discrimination, economic. This attack on women's reproductive rights is really an attack on their economic freedom. Their decision to decide when and if to have a family. And we can see it that women in the workforce has hit its height 20 years ago and has been going down ever since because we continue to undermine women each and every day. And this is beyond just access to abortion. This is also contraception, which is another reason why I'm for Medicare for all. The Hobby Lobby decision would go away if we had Medicare for all, which is why we need it. I also want to be clear about something. We need to codify the right to choose. It's got to be something we don't rely on the Supreme Court and hope that Ruth Bader Ginsburg never dies. I don't think we can count on that. It might happen, I don't know. Also, this is important. For me, I've been inspired by my mother. My father's a nice guy, but my fight, my passion comes from my mother, and I would just like to take a moment to wish all the mothers in the room Happy Mother's Day. I can't believe none of them thought of that. Gareth was definitely usually gets those.
Mr. Beal, you get to answer the next one first, I believe. Why is there a cap on income for Social Security tax? If we all paid up to the top of our income, the fund would be solvent.
What a great question. What a great question. Why is there a cap on income for Social Security tax? There shouldn't be one. We should be raising Social Security benefits. And I want to make sure everybody hears me right. Right now, you and I pay taxes towards Social Security, which they insanely call an entitlement, when it's in fact the money we're putting into the program. And we all keep paying until Jeff Bezos reaches $118,500 in income. And then you and I stop paying, and Jeff Bezos, you and I keep paying, and Jeff Bezos stops paying. If he kept paying, we'd be able to fund an increase in Social Security benefits, and we should. But let me add something else. Do you know that if income inequality had not widened to the terrible place that it's at right now, and if incomes were only at the place that they were at in 1983, that there would be $1 trillion more in our Social Security coffers right now? That terrible widening income inequality is a threat to our democracy, and it is undermining the most basic programs that we have created that all Americans value, including 99% of the people in our district. Thank you.
Just real quickly, in case it wasn't already clear how strongly I feel about women's issues, I do also want to say that women only make up 20% of Congress right now. While we're half the population, we're only 20% of Congress. And I do think that that is a gender inequality and that women should have more of a say in decision making. So now to the question, I also agree we should absolutely not have a cap on income for Social Security. That's ridiculous. Another thing that's ridiculous is that Republicans continue to try to privatize Social Security system. And they also try to raise the retirement age. Why that continues to happen is a complete attack on working class families, and it is another way that Republicans put the burden on working class families and give breaks to the wealthiest Americans, and something that I will fight very, very hard against.
Jeff, I could not agree more with you on this point in terms of the widening inequality. When the cap was first instituted, it only actually captured about 90% of all income. And now it's down to about 80% because more and more and more income is being kept in the hands of a few and not somehow, as promised, trickling down to anybody else. So as long as you have the top 10% of all folks living in this country earning more than 75% of all the income, we're going to have a problem here. And so yes, I do believe we have to make sure that we take the adjustment and make the adjustment here to capture more and more income, particularly for those folks who are in the top 10 top 15% who are paying a fraction of their income, if that, into Social Security.
I agree, we have to raise, or I would say eliminate the cap. The immediate attack that's going to come from John Faso and all the Republicans, though, is, well, how are you going to pay for that? Entitlements are going up and up and up. That is their standard go-to line. So we have to be ready with a response, which I am, and which I think you all know where we're going here. Let's all actually pay our fair share of taxes, which we haven't done in this country, I don't think ever in my lifetime. I'm 36 years old. There are more tax loopholes than we can possibly even keep track of. My two favorites, the carried interest loophole that costs billions so that hedge fund folks can not pay their fair share of taxes, and then the stepped up basis so that rich people can hand over their property and their assets to their already rich children and not pay their fair taxes. And I could go on and on and on. So we not only have to make the case to protect and lift the cap on Social Security, we have to be ready for the Republican response, and I know we can continue to defend this absolutely critical program. I hear about it all the time when I'm knocking on doors.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you.
2037. That's the year that Social Security is going to be unable to pay out its benefits under the same situation that it's in now. It's a crisis, and I'll say to the high school students and younger in the room here today, Social Security on its current path is not going to be there for you. This is a crisis and it needs fixing. That's why I do also agree with we have to raise the cap on who pays into Social Security to save this system for the long term. One of the reasons I believe we need a new generation in Congress is we can't expect the same people who created this problem to fix it. And John Faso is one of those. I'll tell you, in 2004, he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in support of President Bush's proposal to privatize Social Security. When he ran for governor in 2006, he wanted to do away with these union pension plans in exchange for private pension plans, which would have paid out much less. Money that people have paid into and earned. So we need to send people to Congress who have a vested interest in this. And that is me, because Social Security is not going to be there when I retire on its current path. And that is why I will fight harder than anyone else to make sure we fix it.
I'd like to quickly go back to the last question to mention the fact that we didn't talk enough about the culture of assault that we see on women and girls and this culture of misogyny, and we, especially as men, have to do more to be allies and partners, and we have failed you, and we will no longer do that. In response to this question, I've come out strongly for the need to raise the cap. The other night I mistakenly said raise the age, and I almost got killed. But raise the cap, and also, but I think we need to go beyond that. We need to increase the benefits for Social Security, but we also need to establish, finally, universal pensions. Every other developed nation has them. It should start when you're 18 years old. It should be in addition to Social Security. I have a plan for that. Universal pensions would enable us to replicate what has been completely lost as we've eviscerated unions. My plan for the American worker addresses these types of barriers. Because right now, retirement security and the lack of retirement security is a barrier that prevents people from moving ahead, from increasing their wages. Universal pensions will enable us to actually finally achieve what other nations have been doing for years. Thank you.
As a small businessman, I've paid these FICA taxes for the last almost 40 years. And they were some of the most onerous taxes we had to pay. You talk about how does a small business person get started? How does the innovative, creative forces of the future who want to start businesses? Well, that is an onerous tax. Now, what we can do is actually not only reduce the cap, but blow up the cap so that Warren Buffett pays the same amount as I do. You can pay for Social Security. You can also use it as a tax deduction for the small business person. So you get a win-win out of raising the taxes on FICA, because that is a regressive tax that shouldn't be in place, and you have to ask why. Why is it that we give a carried interest loophole to hedge fund guys? Why is it that we don't tax super rich people at the same rate that we do small businessmen? It's because of campaign donations from Wall Street, hedge fund guys, and big corporate donors. We need to change that system also. Thank you.
The next question, Ms. Collier will answer first. Do you support or oppose withdrawal from the Iran agreement, and why?
I oppose the withdrawal from the Iran agreement. This was a really big mistake, yet another really big mistake by our president. So drawing from that deal, one, creates a lot of instability. It just opens the door to see what Iran is already, we're already seeing retaliatory remarks coming out of Iran about it, and it just furthermore alienates us from our partners as well in the global community. France, UK, they're all upset that we left that deal, and rightfully so. After agreeing to it, you don't leave a deal, which Trump continues to do over and over. And secondly, Iran's economy is already plummeting. They're already greatly struggling. So when you leave a deal with them, it's allowing them to give Iran a scapegoat. And now all they can do is point to the fact that US left the deal, and now that is going to be the reason for continuing plummeting. Now they have something to blame it on. If we would have just stayed in the deal and allowed for peaceful negotiations and to continue to keep Iran in negotiations and dialogue, that is the best thing that we could have done.
Yeah, as I noted earlier, I thought it was a very reckless decision. Not just from the standpoint of undermining our capacity to enter in these kinds of agreements in the future. We have the potential of doing so with North Korea. But how do you actually build any, faith and credit if you begin to pull yourself out of agreements that are not unilaterally, but actually multinational agreements that folks are depending on our trust moving forward? But also it destabilizes the region, and we're already seeing that right now, where Iran now has increased and began to get even more aggressive with Israel, having now felt like it's been unleashed, having now with the Iran agreement being taken off the table. So it's about stabilizing and creating a more secure Middle East as a result. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Iran is an actor that we should be trustworthy of. Absolutely not. But the deal is the deal. And when you have it in place, you stick to it. I think the merits speak for themselves. And what we have now is an ever more dangerous environment that we have to figure out how to rein in.
I agree, and this is a strong statement because I think Trump's made more foreign policy blunders than any president ever. But I think this is the single biggest foreign policy mistake that he has made in the 16 months he's been in office. It undercuts our entire international reputation, as my colleagues have said, makes the region more dangerous. My biggest concern is what Antonio talked about, which is that we're about to enter a potential opportunity to denuclearize North Korea and potentially demilitarize the Korean Peninsula, where we've been technically at war for 50+ years. And Trump is going to throw that away, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this decision, which Trump had actually recertified the deal 3 times prior. Then John Bolton comes in as a new national security advisor. The first thing we do is pull out of this deal and wreak havoc. John Bolton was largely responsible for the war that brought me and Jeff and hundreds of thousands of others into Iraq. This guy's never seen a war he didn't like. We have to stand up against the war cabinet that Trump is continuing to build. We're going to have more of these kind of decisions.
No.
Wait a minute, Brian.
I got all excited.
No, pulling out the deal was absolutely the wrong thing. And this follows a pattern of this administration where their decisions are made on political reasons, not on policy reasons. This goes back to pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. North Korea and Syria are signatories to the Paris Agreement, and the United States now is not because of the Trump administration. This deal, even though the United States pulled out, a number of European countries who are members of this part of this deal are still enforcing it. So it didn't just blow up the entire deal, it just took America away, making it a less effective deal. And you saw the statements from Germany, you saw the statements from France and other countries saying this makes them much less willing in the future to work together with our country for these important foreign policy decisions and agreements, which most importantly will keep us out of war. Make sure we're not going to spend that $6 trillion like we did in Iraq. Keep us away from war. And Antonio's right. It's important to say here and draw a line in the sand. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But the way to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon was this deal. It wasn't perfect. It was a step in the right direction. And pulling it out of it was extraordinarily irresponsible.
Now it's your turn.
In my experience, when I worked on the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, we were able to hold Libya accountable. We were able to force them to give up weapons of mass destruction and force them to give over terrorists, and we did it through sanctions and diplomacy. That's how these types of deals work. What we did here is by pulling out of that deal, we've undermined the hard work, the multilateral work that had been done to hold Iran accountable. But here's what's worse. This is a march towards war. This is out of the fascist playbook. What Donald Trump and the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia are doing is they're basically aligning themselves and trying to create conflict with Iran so that we force ourselves to war, and all of a sudden that Liv has had enough of this answer. You can tell why Liv. Liv's only 5 months old, we'll forgive her. I still would like her vote. The Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia is working with Donald Trump to ensure that we actually start on a march towards war with Iran. That is what we have to stand up against. That is why we have to change this Congress. We have to change the authorization so you can no longer do this. This is one of the most important issues, and everyone here is right on this issue. But let's be clear, this is the threat of authoritarianism, this is the threat and a march towards war. We have to stand up now.
Thank you.
Trump is making the world more dangerous as we speak. We have Netanyahu supporting issues that are enraging the entire Muslim world. We have the Palestinians marching on their doorsteps. We have Saudi Arabia fighting against the control of Iran that has been promulgated by a war in Iraq that empowered Iran, and the war in Syria that again empowers Iran. So war is the issue, and we need to find a way around it that doesn't blow up the whole Middle East. So I think, one, obviously everything that's been said I agree with in terms of our allies are what we need. In order to achieve a diplomatic solution, you need our allies. You know that France and Germany and Britain all asked, we can redo this at a level that will stop Iran's terrorist activities. Let's put pressure on that. Let's not blow up the prohibition against nuclear weapons, because that is too dangerous to do. And yet Trump didn't do it.
The baby did start crying as this question was asked, and I can understand why. I think a lot of us feel as helpless as that child looking at the way our international affairs are being handled right now. John Kenneth Galbraith was a great economist, and he used to say that foreign policy seems to be made at a campfire, and unless you get to sit around that campfire, all you can do is just pitch things over and hope somebody catches it. That's because it's really hard to make an influence on foreign affairs unless you have experience. I was a United States diplomat in Iraq when we opened our first talks with Iran. I saw those talks save lives as Iran put in armor-piercing weapons that were killing our soldiers day after day. If you have the Daily Star today, you'll see an article about Iran talking about a guy named Hadi al-Amiri. I know this guy personally. He's an Iranian-influenced Iraqi leader that I faced down for our country before, and I want to face down again in the cause of peace, in the cause of pursuing agreements that can take us away from nuclear war, which no American wants, and towards a more peaceful world. I want to give you a number, $4 to $6 trillion. That's how much was spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know how much that money could have bought us? It could have bought us a national jobs program, a guarantee for all that would have lasted for 10 years. Let's do that.
Well, it's 6:30. Do we have energy for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions into one and editorialize it. You are all fine candidates, but one of you is going to win the race. Your first big job will be to hire a campaign manager. So how are you going to go about doing that? And perhaps you could enlighten us by how you went about hiring a campaign manager for this part of the process. And a big part of that is funding your campaign. So how are you going to fund your campaign? I believe, Mr. Delgado, you are next.
Yeah, so I my wife and I, when we sat down to think about running for this seat, and we sat down, it's a partnership. We called a friend of hers she went to high school with. He has been somebody who's worked a number of congressional races over the years and has had a ton of experience. There's actually been a bunch of TV ads for folks you may know, like Cory Booker, and somebody that we trusted a lot, a dear friend who I've known for 10, 15 years. And he's somebody that has really enabled us to figure out and climb that learning curve to what is an otherwise Herculean effort here. That is, I have the utmost respect for everybody on this stage because the amount of work and sacrifice it takes, individually and on our respective families, is mind-boggling. Now, that being said, we have to win. And I think to do that, you have to be able to raise money and compete in this district. And I'm proud to say that that same individual told us on that first phone call, don't do this. No matter how right you feel your heart is, if you don't have the ability to raise money and go out there and do the work every single day. And we've been able to do that and received a lot of money from individuals just like you all across this district. Thank you.
So Antonio talked about his wife. I actually asked my wife to be my campaign manager, and she said no way. But she is truly. When we met, she was actually working at the White House. She's smarter than me, tougher than me, and better than me in every way. But she turned me down. So I hired a great individual who worked for a representative that I really respect from a rural part of the country. Because this district is 88% rural. It's actually one of the most rural congressional districts in the country. And we as a Democratic Party need to figure out, again, how to speak to Democrats and Republicans and independents in rural parts of the country if we're going to take back the House and take back our country. So that's why I chose the campaign manager I did. In terms of campaign finance, we don't have a lot of time. I could go on for hours about how broken the system is. I'm proud of taking a pledge from a group called End Citizens United to take no corporate money, no corporate PAC money. That is at the heart of what's wrong with our system. And doing it the right way, I'm proud to say that we've raised over $1.4 million, which is going to be necessary because last time around, John Faso and outside money spent over $10 million to win this seat. So all of us are going to have to be ready to go up to against that.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And timekeepers, I think we can give an extra 10 or 15 seconds because this is a long question.
Should I give Antonio a pat another shot? This is a great question. My campaign is very locally focused. Being someone who's born and raised here in the district, I hired a campaign manager who worked for Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, who went to take on to SUNY Oneonta and SUNY New Paltz, who had run races here in the area, to just continue with making sure we run a race where when people knock on your door, it's your neighbor. And campaign finance, this is important. I know when I was taking a look at this race, it's expensive to get out there. The average wealth of a member of Congress today, $1 million, 18 times the annual income of a family here in New York 19, and a lot higher than a family here in Delaware County. 3 of the candidates up here have been very generous to themselves, giving themselves $50,000 or more. I wish I could do that, but I can't. So I've done it differently. $19 for New York 19. We run a very aggressive grassroots effort. Proud to say that we are one of the leading candidates for the amount of money we've raised from low dollar, $200 and below. Raised now nearly $800,000. But in the end, money's not going to be the end of the game here. We had a candidate in this race who spent $4 million of his own money in 2014, $4 million, and lost by 30 points. So at some point you have to say money makes a difference because you need staff. My Winnebago takes a little bit of gas here and there. But you have to make sure you have the right candidate because that is the only way we're going to be able to win this race.
Mr. Flynn?
When I decided to run, I spoke with people I knew from my past experience that worked for Senator Gillibrand, Senator Kennedy, and I also spoke with my friend Sean Patrick Maloney. His daughter and my son knew each other from years ago. But I actually decided on my campaign manager based on an activist here up in Otsego County. I asked her who should I find, and she found someone for me who had worked a red to blue in a rural area. I hired her, and it's been one of the best things to happen to my campaign. She's been amazing and has become a true friend. And actually a better parent to my kids than I am. But it's important, 80% of our staff comes from within the district because in past elections in this area, people haven't paid attention to you people when we're trying to win these races. That's how we're going to win. You know what matters to people in your community. So 80% of my staff comes from within the 19th Congressional District from each and every county, or almost every county in the district. The other thing is I have driven 70,000 miles and done over 320 campaign stops, and we will easily get over 400 in the next month. That's what it takes. You have to do both. I've also raised $1.4 million because you have to do both. You have to be on the ground and be out there and making a difference, but also be able to raise the money. You have to be able to do both sides of it. And you also have to remember who brought you here. I have no one supporting me. I don't have any congressman or governor supporting my campaign. It's just me. And I wish I did have it. That's who the only people I'm going to represent when I go to Washington are the people in this room and the people throughout this district. That's who I'll be beholden to. Thank you.
I have one rich guy supporting me, and I want to thank you for that, Brian. I really appreciate that. Campaign finance reform is something that's big on my issue, but let's just talk about it quickly. I was really surprised and heartened when I made my search for a campaign manager and found that people traveled from all over the country to get into this race, and people who really cared about changing Congress and making it a blue wave and getting a Democratic Congress. So I had the pick of the litter, and I picked the best one that I could, and he's a wonderful young man, and he's doing a great job. Now, in terms of what it takes to win this race, it takes grassroots. It takes people. It takes commitment to the community. It takes decades of effort so that you have built up that background and accomplishment and deep change in the community in a positive way. And then you stand up to John Faso. We have 600 volunteers, at least double what anybody else in the stage has. We have thousands of roots in the community because I've been here for 37 years. What it takes to stand up to the dark money behind John Faso, and we know the last two races didn't work, and they had plenty of money. They had $5 million in Zephyr Teachout, and Sean spent even more than that. But they lost and they got killed because they didn't have that dedication to the community. That's what it takes to beat John Faso. Thank you.
Underlying this question of what you're going to do when you win and who you're going to recruit staffing from is the question of the Democratic Party itself. We're in a struggle right now for the soul of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is something I love and I want to see revived to the ways that it lived in the days of FDR, who was in our district, but it has lost elections across this country, lost us our majority, and forgot what it stands for. So when I started my campaign, I tried to approach things differently, to revive what I thought was a lost tradition, one that I saw being revived by Bernie Sanders, one being revived by Elizabeth Warren, and I was endorsed by that national organization of Bernie Sanders staffers, the Justice Democrats, to stand up to corporate funding and corporate campaigns and run a grassroots one. That's why we have in my campaign rallied young people around the district to our campaign. The head of the SUNY Oneonta Young Democrats is on our campaign, the head of the SUNY New Paltz Young Democrats, activists from Riverkeeper, activists who were out there in the past presidential primary, and more. That is, I believe, how we win this election. And what it means is getting rid of the old playbook that says, let's try to eke out a 51-49 victory over the Republicans, and instead breaking the ties of corporate money that hold us back from putting forward a bold platform, and actually having a platform that fights income inequality, provides Medicare for all, and appeals to 99% of the people in the district, and then we beat John Faso by a landslide. That's going to dictate the way I run the campaign in the general election. Thank you.
And Ms. Talia, you have the last word.
If elected for staffing, I want to hire as many people as possible for my staff from New York 19. I have a lot of pride, again, my family's been here for 8 generations. So this is my heart and my home, and I really want to, in terms of hiring, that's such a great way to give back. And in terms of, social capital and building and networking for New York 19, people of New York 19, I would love to bring as many people on my staff as possible from New York 19. So that will be a very serious initiative of mine. For funding, I am proud to say that Senator Gillibrand donated from her leadership PAC to my campaign, which is a huge honor to have that support from her. Senator Gillibrand is someone that I greatly look up to and admire in everything that she has done, so I'm very honored. And of course, as I mentioned, with the Emily's List endorsement, like I said, Emily's List has only endorsed 3 candidates for Congress in New York: Senator Gillibrand, Congresswoman Maloney, and me. So that kind of backing going up against Faso, they had 20 candidates. Emily's List had 20 candidates in primaries on Tuesday. Every single one of them won their races. So I'm excited to have that kind of support going up against Faso if elected, or if I win this primary. And I also want to just say lastly that their money in politics is a huge problem. And as somebody coming from a non-wealthy family and who's not wealthy myself, it is really prohibitive to run for office, and I will work and do everything I can to fix that. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Democratic Committee, first of all, I would like to thank our timekeepers. It's a harder job than you do. I'd also like to thank our candidates. They've been to many, many of these. They clearly have their arguments. They showed us where they agree, where they disagree, with all good humor. And thanks to all of you for coming today. This is democracy at its roots, what it's all about. Don't forget the election on Tuesday for school budgets. And I think the candidates will probably be willing to spend a few minutes with you if you can corral them out in the lobby.